Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here with fellow panelists Mario Ramos-Reyes and Christopher Zehnder. Today we discuss family life in the context of our chaotic times. Our special guest is Valerie Niemeyer, an American Solidarity Party leader from Nebraska. Go Cornhuskers. She is the mother of 6 and a homeschooler. She also has a longstanding interest in social justice. Let's begin, as we always do, in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, come fill the hearts of your faithful and enkindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. Let us pray, O God, who has taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit. Grant that by the gift of the same Spirit, we may be always truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. A bit of background, please. You visited Paraguay when you were 17.
Yes. I had very brave
to be active in the American Solidarity Party.
Yeah. So I had very brave parents. I lived in Kansas City, a Kansas area. Mario, I found out you live pretty close to there. So I had a teacher who was a nun, who was one of the kind of pioneering members of this group called Amigos de las Americas. I don't know if you're familiar with it, Mario, but my sister went down with that program. So she would host all the formation meetings. It's kind of like a junior Peace Corps. They send high schoolers down, college students help lead, and there's adults on staff in various countries in Latin America. And you do kind of social projects, community health projects, and you live with a host family, and you just get to encounter life and share life with the poor in Latin America. And so my mom and dad were pretty brave, and my sister went before me. She went to Paraguay, and then I went to Paraguay for 8 weeks and lived in a family, walking on cracked dirt floors and watching the sun come in through the cracks in the side of the house when I woke up, and listening to the animals on the outside of the wall outside of me, and just really receiving the beauty of human dignity. It was like scales fell from my eyes. As a teenager, middle American, middle class, doing all the things, sports, music, social, wondering about whether the senior, 2 rows back for me, like my new shoes, was I wearing, how did my jeans look? I mean, all of that, which I thought had so much to do with human dignity, at that point in my life, no. The beauty of human dignity shined so much in that setting, and I became more human. I fell in love. I'm sure you all have heard that prayer by Pedro Arrupe, right? What you fall in love with determines what you do with your days and your years and your time and your heart and everything. So I kind of fell in love with the poor of Latin America. They had given me such a gift with their hospitality, their strong communal life, their humanity. And so I just kept seeking it out. I went to Ecuador the next summer with my parish had a sister parish. When I got to college, I studied Spanish and secondary education. I spent a semester down in the Dominican Republic. Did some service projects while I was there, but studied, learned about Catholic social teaching, learned about the plight of the poor in that particular country, how it related to the United States, some of the choices that have been made in the United States by our government. And it's all very heartbreaking, of course. And so that was a big part of my formation as a human. I went to Catholic schools for 16 years, but I didn't actually have a personal conversion until after college. I went to Spain for my last semester in college, and not a lot of vibrant faith over there in the life of the youth. And I think out of that it was a beautiful time, but out of that desert of, I had lived a beautiful life. I had so many opportunities and privileges, and, the void was still there, and God woke me up and was like, hey, I'm here. I love you. I'm real. The faith of my childhood became very real after that experience that I had. And so then I fell in love again, and this time with God. And as I was working, I actually chose not to teach. I just wanted to work with the immigrants in my community and just do the little that I could to lessen the load of the difficulties of their lives. And so I worked in a clinic at various places, but I one of the things that became in prayer and through tears very apparent, very clear to my heart, was the dignity, not just of the poor, but the dignity of the unborn from the moment of conception. So I had been interpreting for a couple one time that came in, beautiful couple, and they came in after having had an IUD placed, and they had found out that with an IUD, like maybe they could have conceived a child, and that it wouldn't have been able to implant. And they came in, just very disturbed, and asked the doctor if that was in fact the case. And when she said, well, we don't really know, but that is a possibility. And and they were just like, their hearts were like, and I had to excuse myself from the room, partly because I believe the Holy Spirit, and my own heart was like just so touched by that. So I had to leave the room, and I cried. And that's just an example of how I feel like God convicted me on that issue. So for years, I just felt like it was really important. I was a registered independent for years. It just really felt like the life issue was like the prominent human rights violation of our time that was causing the most damage to humanity. So I always just kind of voted with that in mind, but it was never satisfying, because I had really a heart for so many other issues across the spectrum politically. And so when I found the American Solidarity Party, it was like, oh, wow, I can engage with this. It really gave me hope. So that's why I'm here.
Well, you came through the open door with a story, that's for sure, and a story with many chapters. Mario, would you like to take us forward here?
Well, I'm very pleased that you encountered Christ in Paraguay. But I'm wondering if that was you said your conversion. Did you know anything about Christian Democratic Party or Christian Democratic Movement or social action when you were living those days in Paraguay?
No, I was just a very self-absorbed little teenager. So no, I didn't. I wasn't aware. I do remember, I remember a story, that of course the language there in the campo where I was Guarani largely. So my host mother's second language was Spanish, and my second language was Spanish. So we couldn't communicate really thoroughly, but I remember her talking about, a river that was maybe red with blood as a result of some of the warfare there. But no, I wasn't in tune with any of that.
Oh, interesting. So you also mentioned about the Catholic social teaching. How is it that teaching inform family life, for instance?
Yeah. Well, it's brilliantly relevant, of course. I feel like the social teaching of the church has been an effort to articulate how we have come to understand the mystery of the Trinity insofar as it relates to our life as humans and our being made in the image of the Trinity. There's this kind of amazing mystery of, when I'm teaching my 2-year-old about God, is like the other day, tell me about God, is I said, who's God? And my 2-year-old said, Jesus. And I said, well, yes. And is the Father God? And he said, yes. And I said, is the Holy Spirit God? And he said, yes. And it's like this, like, really? the mystery of 3 in 1, the mystery of fully Jesus and fully given and united with the other persons of the Trinity. I mean, of course, that reality, we're made in that image and likeness. And of course, it's first lived in the family, right? So we experience that as husband and wife, and the bringing forth of life, and the tensions of, again, the individual versus the common good in the family. I mean, that's the first place that we experience that, right? That tension between, well, I want, this is what is going to fulfill me right now. And, but it isn't at the service of my family right now. And so that those tensions of how do we live in right relationship, you know, as both as a person being fulfilled and having the dignity of my individuality, but also being in the service and giving my heart to others in my midst, you know. So we learn that in the family, and social teaching describes some of that on the macro scale, right? Like how we live that in society. I'm thinking of, like, I always think of the concept of participation when my 2-year-old is throwing a fit, you know, in Costco because he wants to get his own paper towel from the machine. You know, like, no, I want to do it myself, you know. The, you know, subsidiarity when my teenagers, you know, are fighting, or any kids are fighting, and I come into the room, I don't know exactly what happened. They do. They know all the dynamics of what happened. I could come in and just kind of like with an iron fist, like, okay, no, you, and I do often, I try, you know, I try to solve it with force from the mom level. Like, no, you just, you know, and I often don't get it right. Like, I don't know all of the little details that are going on, or the habits, or the, but and if it's better if I give them the tools to be able to learn how to problem solve amongst themselves and communicate amongst themselves, because they're the ones that really know the depth of the dynamics. But as a mom, that takes more patience and it takes more grace, I would say. And I don't often invite that grace, but so subsidiarity, I see it there. Obviously, you know, rights and duties, and I mean, there's so many aspects of Catholic social teaching. That solidarity, I mean, when, you know, we rejoice together, we weep together as a family, and when somebody's hurting, we're hurting, or sometimes we're not, and that's a call to grow in love. Like when my kid is crying because for the 3rd time today he stubbed his toe on something because he was running through the house and not wearing shoes, it's very tempting for me to not have compassion. Like, the pain that he's experiencing is real, and I, you know, sometimes I really just want to not be in solidarity with him. You know, I don't want to suffer with him, because it's like, come on, I tell you all the time, you can't run around in the house without shoes on and expect to not get hurt. I mean, I do have a responsibility to help him make that cause and effect relationship, but solidarity, choosing to suffer with, I mean, if I have a kid has a certain temperament and is struggling in school, you know, and I'm not quite sure how to help him, it's my temptation is to just, like, I don't know, like, just leave it, but I really need to take the moment. I really need to take time to get down on his level and try to understand what he's experiencing, you know, and be in solidarity with him and really understand the dynamics more and what I can do to lift maybe whatever cross he's going through, you know, with that. But it takes patience and presence, and family life. I think it's particularly hard these days with all of the business. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I look back on Paraguay and I just glory in the memory of the pace of life was so much slower, and people were more present to each other, and there was so much more encounter, you know. And it's just, life is so full in America in 2021, you know, it can be very hard to create the space that you need as a family to live these principles, you know, in that first society of the family, so that our kids can learn how to go into the world and into their communities and bring those tools with them.
You mentioned space. And when I first met Christopher Zehnder, he'd created a certain space. He had a writer's shed, and he went out to write in his shed, and that gave him a certain space. And I'm sure he has many insights into the account that you've been giving. So, Christopher, take us forward, if you will.
It wasn't quite a shed. It was a small house that was in very advanced state of disrepair. So
An outbuilding. It's an outbuilding.
Yeah, but yeah. Anyway, it could be pretty cold in winter. Yeah, Valerie, you've talked about three kinds of societies, it seems, in this case: the Trinity, the family, and the state. And you've discussed them in terms of analogies, like as the persons of the Trinity stand to one another, so the members of the family, in a sense, stand towards one each other. So people in society stand toward each other. That's to describe the family. Forget the Trinity for a minute. That's to describe the family as something distinct and other, almost, or it's not to clearly to see the family in relation to the larger society. What do you think Catholic social teaching says about the relationship of this family to the greater society? Is it simply a private institution that we have the family, and it has really no relation to the society as a whole? Just like, like a club that I might join might not have any direct relation to society, except insofar as it's allowed to exist. Or is it something more integral to it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think absolutely it's, if you look at the salvation history, right? You have Abraham. You start with Abraham. You start with a family. You start with the family of Abraham, and how redemption moves through a family tree, and I think, a lot of people see, I guess I would say, I feel like it's more like society is the branches, and like the roots are the family, super integral to the well-being of the larger society. And we're called to be light, to be hope provokers as a family. And unfortunately, I don't think that there's enough of that.
What do you think about, traditionally the family has been described as the basic unit of society. So being the basic, we tend to think in the United States, right? The basic unit of society is the individual, that the state is made up of a group of individuals, whereas at least the Catholic account has been, and I think the Aristotelian account would be that society is actually made up of family groups, and that individuals actually participate in society almost indirectly, right, through the family. Right. So that's so we're talking about something, right? I think that's really a key nowadays, because all the talk we have about the nature of the family, whether you can have two men and two women to share marriage,
Mm-hmm.
all of that kind of comes down to the question of what is the family. And it seems like if we don't get that right, we're not going to get anything else right, because you can't build upon sand. You can't build upon nothing. Or if you change the foundations of the society, change the basic unit, you change the character of society.
Yeah, and I think we can look at like the woundedness of society, and we can see, we can think about, the people we know, and the wounds and the crosses that people carry. And I think it's pretty obvious that broken families are a major source of major source of the problem, in that you can't make, every person walking around in society is a graduate of family life. Every member of a community is a graduate of family life. And as humans, again, made in the image and likeness of a triune God, that experience of that family, the identity as one who is integrally connected to other people in love, if that goes well, everything goes better for that, not only that person, but for the society that they touch, that those they encounter, and all of that.
One of the noteworthy and now expunged positions in public of Black Lives Matter was a call to move beyond the family and a celebration of an extended family, and a kind of advancing of the idea that it takes a village and the like. And that received some criticism in Christian circles. I think it was largely overlooked in, say, My Morning Punishment, the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. I don't recall them ever even alluding to that. And then if you do the digging and you say, read Marx and Engels on the family, there's a profoundly different understanding of the family there. And I think in general, there are trains of thought that are woven into contemporary social justice movements that are really antithetical to the family. And I suppose they largely get toned down, but you have the general sense that there's this real division between, let's say, the standard social justice warrior and, a good homeschooling Catholic family in terms of what they take the family to be. Now, is that a bridge never to be gapped, or could we make some headway in discussing that, or could we even bring it into the larger and in its own way smaller public discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a beautiful impulse, behind that desire to say, all is, I mean, be so careful. I think that the family is the ordinary means that God established to discover our identity as people who are destined, our origin and our destiny is to love and be loved. That's that's the ordinary means that the Lord provided. Now, this is a broken and fallen world, and we need to, anybody who doesn't experience that in a family, I mean, God is just like this heartsick father, right? That he wants to gather together his children. He wants to work through all of us. He wants us all to consider, I mean, the Pope is saying, right, we're all brothers and sisters, we're family. I mean, he wants us to have this sense of being responsible for one another, and being people who help people to discover their identity as the beloved and to become, those who truly love in the way that, grace and God invites us to love. And so if that doesn't happen in the family, I mean, which it doesn't for many people, right? Like there's a need for these kind of the community to be this, the village that helps to heal and helps to strengthen people in love. But let's not call that the ordinary means. I mean, come on, the Lord intended, and we all, I mean, it's common sense, right? Like that nothing can replace the family in terms of, God's plan for our discovery of what it is to be human and to truly love. Nothing can replace that. But if the family, the ordinary, that God laid out, it isn't what, if it isn't what he meant it to be for someone, there are many other ways that the Lord can bless them and that they can find wholeness and healing outside of the immediate family. So I guess I want to be careful about, sort of making this is the norm, and then there's no redemption of anything other than this, this family life thing. But I'm not being very articulate right now, but I don't know. Does that answer your question? Where did I lack clarity?
I don't think you lack clarity at all. I think there's so much to be said here. One phenomenon, and I see this with community all the time. One phenomenon with family is that the language of family is sometimes, I think, quite deliberately trivialized. So we have the family of local grocery store, the family of Kroger shoppers, and our own credit union family will be here for you. And so we have all over the place the emergence of communities that are really just demographics, they're not communities, and the emergence of families that are faux families. They really are advertising pitches.
Mm-hmm.
And to put all of this in terms of the nature of the Trinity is not only not good news for most people, but totally unheard of news. And I guess I'm just saying there's so much work to be done here. And you've mentioned several times about our being in a broken society. And part of what's necessary in order to do something with a broken society is say where it's broken, identify the breaks, and identify them in such a way as to lead as many of us as possible to focus on those ruptures. But
Mm-hmm.
but this is something that we work on every day. And Mario, why don't you direct us down one or other of these channels?
Well, I have been listening with great interest. The beginning, I think, of the Christian democratic movement always began, I'm going to emphasize that, with the family. And the reason why that was the case is because the founder of the Christian democratic movement is Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And if Christ is the founder, the beginning is an encounter, always. For that reason, going back to Latin America, I still remember vividly the distinction that we made, and I still making, between what we call movement and society. Distinction, not separation. The word movement was applied to the Christian democratic movement in the sense that the relationship between people was based on affection more than a contractual relationship, affection, encounter. And if that is the case, began with the family. In other words, a movement was an expanded family. When you have a web of relationship, start getting larger and larger. And then when the times come, you can institutionalize to somehow and have a political party of some sort. So the distinction, the focus mainly was building those in sociological term was called subjects, communities. And so the focus was building those subjects, those communities, beginning with not building those political apparatus, never began with politics. Politics was not the first. Now, you can call politics within the family, that's a different matter, okay. Now, if that then is the case, and you read under this light, the two documents written by Cardinal Ratzinger, 1984, 86, about liberation theology. When you see behind this beautiful document was precisely that we in the Christian, in the Catholic Church, Catholic social teaching must build a movement, a community first, not political apparatus. Now, what was the problem? The problem was that we tried to do the other way around, apparatus, and then try to, through legal means, build what is impossible, because affection you don't build with laws. Now, I think that view is very helpful in order to understand why many Christian democratic parties just disappear. And disappear because they trust too much on power, influences, lobbying, et cetera, and start forgetting what is the sap that nurtured this movement.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the family, everything then begins with the family, because we are, the assumption is, or the claim, bold claim is, we are people of encounter. Now, saying this in an environment where everything seems to be going through politics, organizing, committees, everything is nonsense because it's long-term. And in the history of Latin America, that made sense, because what Valerie said very well, the pace of life is very slow. It's lower than you have somehow, we used to have time to build this relationship. Whereas in a very industrialized technological society, it seems that you don't have time for anything other than look at your phone. And so you don't have intimate life and so on.
There's
And
time savers, you don't have any time left.
so that's my, I don't know if it makes sense, my reflection, but I see it that way. I don't know, what is your reaction, Valerie?
Hey, we are consumed by consumption. We are. I remember. I mean, I was allowed a 70-pound bag of stuff to take to the Paraguay for 8 weeks. And I think I had more trash in that bag than they generated, in a month, if that. But and it's just a little illustration. Like we want to consume so much, and we want it to be a transactional. We want it to be, I mean, it reminds, what you're saying reminds me of, just as I was pondering the question of why this lack of recognition of the role of the family and the hope of the family. And I think partly why social justice warriors, if you want to put that, that in quotes, I mean, they're just a product. We are a product. I'm impatient. Like I mentioned, wanting to just walk into a room and just fix the problem with my kids, right? Like I just want it to be over. I just want to, we don't have the patience to engage in the relational work that would actually redeem the situation and help us to grow in love. And I think a lot of, the modern world is so impatient. I mean, I'm so impatient. And we just, there's that Staples commercial a couple decades ago. It had the easy button, like we just want to be able to press the easy button and make it easy. And that's, I think, that top down kind of political approach where we want it to just be, we want it to be easy. And we also are really lacking a, we're seeing in 2D. I mean, my conversion, at the age of 21, 22, I realized my whole life I had just been living in this like 2D world of like, the periodic table and like what's in front of my face, and, like we're just this kind of ecosystem of humanity that's, sort of all the sciences can help, even, psychology, there's some invisible part of it, but this sort of 2D, like mechanistic, materialistic in the sense of not having a soul, not having a spiritual realm. And so we sort of look for solutions in that realm. We want it to be kind of this mechanistic, let's just make it right quick, and the work of relationship the work of love, the work of family life. I mean, we have a hard time. We have a hard time with sacrifice. We have a hard time with true love, and love being a part of the equation, because it's not easy. It's not efficient. It requires patience. It requires suffering. Jesus, I mean, Peter, his most ardent follower, right, was like, get behind me. Jesus, like, get behind me, Satan. When he didn't want him to suffer. He didn't want him to have to suffer. You can't possibly go through that, As a mother of 6, I've felt people not want me to suffer, with each pregnancy that came along. It's like, I mean, if they didn't kind of judge, like, what are you doing? This is just not prudent, we're a 1-income family. My husband, has a very noble job in a manufacturing environment. He didn't get a college degree, and, people, they don't really want to have to see me be uncomfortable, with having more kids, and struggling. And I get that, but it's kind of like, well, we're just, get behind me. Like the cost of love, the cost of true love it has costs, and we don't really like that. It's not what we're inclined to, but there's beauty. There's just so much beauty. There's so much humanity to be enjoyed. We can become human. We can become more humanized through the struggles, the purifications that relationships entail. And so when you talk about a movement, yes, it's like a movement it's people coming together, willing to pay together the cost of pursuing something beautiful and true and good together, and that's way more powerful than some mechanism. Mechanisms can't love, and they can't change hearts, but relationships can.
Christopher, what do you say to this? Relational versus transactional.
Well, oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, when you get to a certain level in government, you have to have the transactional. But it's interesting, I think, if you look at historically, when you had monarchies, for instance, what was the king often called? He is called the father of his people. We speak of the Pope as being the Holy Father. So Jim was talking earlier about analogous, where businesses will talk about the Kroger family or something, some nonsense like that, and just kind of to pull at our heartstrings in a way to get us to want to buy their products, I suppose. But that shows the power of the sense of relationship that actually exists in the family. So, that's if we're going to have a society over and above the family, in some ways it has to mirror that, I think, because if it's that the primary human relationships occur within the family, and so the state, or the village, if you will, becomes something relational in itself as well. So even with all the transactional things we're going to have to need, I mean, I'm now a village counselor here in Hartford, Ohio, and I know there's just certain things that
Meeting, an early morning meeting.
Yeah.
Hit them high, hit them low. That's the way they do it.
Yeah, but there's just certain things you have to be transactional. In a small village, certain things can be much more personal as well. On the whole, but I think it's interesting too, but the whole notion of it takes a village, when Hillary Clinton said that back in, I think it was the 90s, it's in a sense it's true. I mean, if you look at the family, Aristotle talks about this, the family in itself is a society, but it's an imperfect society insofar as it can't really fulfill all the needs it has in order to attain the common good. And that's why families have to be living together in societies. So in that sense, yeah, it does take a village. If we're going to have healthy families, and people who are not within families for some unfortunate reason can be properly taken care of, we're going to have some ordering principle of the state, of the village, if you want to call it that. Without that, so those two things have to be kept in mind. I think that those aspects of the relations in the family, the love, the care one has for each other, has to be expressed also in society. And that society is also important for the perfection of the family. So these things all, there's a kind of mutual relationship and mutual sharing of benefits there.
yeah, ideally, the state, I was reading a definition of conservatism on the imaginative conservative. And one of the statements was something to the effect of the government cannot love. And I was going to actually ask you fellows what you thought of this. The government cannot love, it is a tool to be, used. But, and then somebody down in the comments was like, kind of took issue with that. Like, it is a tool that in a sense can be, I can't remember how he put it, but be used to love. And, but people can't receive love from, the government, and to become more human is to receive love. But the government can sort of tend the garden of humanity, right? That's kind of like to create the space, to create in which again, the love can flourish. We can become more humanized, support communities and families. But I didn't know what you thought about that. The tool, the idea that the government can't love.
Yeah, I think the government. Yeah, what do you mean by the government? Government in itself, being an institution, can't love up, but the people who are actually in the government can love, and they had better love what they're ruling, right? What they're directing. Otherwise, how? I mean, what love is wishing the good for somebody else. Ultimately, it doesn't have, it doesn't primarily have to do with emotions and feelings, and that's part of the problem. But those who are in power should act out of that sense of willing the good, the common good for everybody, and to make sure as far as is possible that everybody participate in the common good. So yeah, they can love. The institution can't love, obviously, because it's not a human being, but the governing authorities certainly can love, it seems to me.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter said he wanted to be the friend of every single American.
I never met him.
Did he pull it off, do you think?
He wasn't reelected.
This whole thing of subsidiarity comes into play too, within the family, for example. My wife is pretty much in charge of our family finances, and she deals for the most part with our children and grandchildren, and pretty well keeps the home running. And people say, well, what does that leave for you? And I have to be right up front with them. I said, who do you think takes care of China policy for this family? All right, I'm sorry. Okay, now, look, you've beautifully spoken of interrelations here, and Christopher's called our attention to the common good, and Mario's talked about the primacy of the relational and the family in terms of the history of Christian democracy. Now, all of this calls for certain strengths, or should we say certain virtues, the virtues. In our various contexts, we are supposed to be teaching the virtues. How do you teach virtues in family life, and what are the central virtues?
You wrestle, and you struggle, and you fail, and you
Karate.
yeah, you yeah. No, I mean, I think teaching virtue. When you ask the question of what are the virtues of family life and how do we learn them, some kind of atypical, I mean, not your typical virtue words came to mind, but there's a Deacon James Keating. He's been local here for a long time, but is now working at a seminary in St. Louis. But he's written some beautiful stuff that has really impacted me greatly. And so when you said the particular virtues of the family, I think I thought of three things stand out: beholding, learning to behold, learning to suffer, and learning to live in reality. Beholding is about how we see people, and as a parent, again, in the busyness of life, sometimes we don't get down and we don't connect, gaze at our children enough, or our husband enough, or our wife, or, and I mean, as humans, like we yearn to be seen, you know, we yearn to, for the good in us, what is true and good and beautiful in us, to be seen, to be beheld, you know. And God, you know, God in creation, he beheld what he created and he said it is good, you know, he beheld it. And that's humanizing. And, you know, we did marriage prep, Joe and I did early on in our marriage. And I remember this one slide that talked about how, well, you know, when you fell in love, there's this cycle of intimacy. When you fell in love, you were in this stage of infatuation, and it sort of spun it as like this kind of shallow stage where you only saw the good in the person, and you know their faults weren't, you know, magnified at all. You just kind of excused the faults, but then, you know, reality hit and disillusionment came, you know, and depending on what you do with the disillusionment, when like reality sets in, like this is hard, actually, this love thing, depending on what you do with that, you can fall apart more, you can have your intimacy can become less because you don't do the work of continuing to behold, right, and to love through the disillusionment. If you can get through that, though, you can actually have a deeper, authentic intimacy. The more authentic you can kind of cycle through, right? And then we kind of grow in love as we work through the disillusionment times. And that made sense to me. But I was reading a letter from Alice von Hildebrand. She wrote a book to young bride, letters to a young bride, and she talked about Tabor vision. I don't know if I'm saying that word right, but how when Christ was, you know, transfigured on Mount Tabor, his disciples were able to see the full reality of his divine identity, reality, and she said, you know, when two people fall in love, in a sense, they are participating in that Tabor vision. They behold the beauty and the goodness in one another in a profound way, not a shallow way, but a profound way. But they're beholding the other with kind of the eyes of God, hopefully, right? Like the more pure it is. But I loved that because I think it's true. And when you get into the disillusionment of the work of love, you know, boy, when babies are born, you just behold the heck out of them. I mean, you cannot behold their beauty enough. And the more children I've had, the more that's been the case. But when things don't go easily, it can be hard to remember to choose to behold the goodness in others. And this kind of relates to the cancel culture too. You know, how do we behold others? You know, do we reject the truth and beauty and goodness in them because of the darkness, maybe that we perceive, the lack of truth, the lack of beauty, the lack of goodness? Are we just going to reject them? Are we going to fail to receive the gift of the goodness in them because of the deficiency? You know, we're called to recognize the darkness, name the darkness. You know, name the deficiencies insofar as we need to name them and move beyond them in order to love more truly. We don't ignore them, but we want to pour light into them, and we want to recognize that that's not the essence of who this person is, the deficiency. So again, beholding in family life, I think beholding in our spouse, continuing to cultivate fondness. You know, Psalm 16 says that the saints are my delight. Like I delight in the saints, and I can't remember it exactly, but I kind of think about that with my children. Like I need to behold my children as the beautiful persons that they are, you know, regardless of how much I'm getting yanked around by their humanity, their deficiencies, it works in progressness, you know. But anyway, beholding and then suffering. We learn to suffer in the family. Again, we have to suffer our humanity. We have to suffer our poor humanity, our poor hearts. It's a crucible. The family is a crucible that purifies our love. And if we're not willing to stay in the suffering of purification, you know, we're not going to come out on the other side more whole and able to enjoy life and humanity, our humanity. We're not going to be able to help others in that journey. And then the last one that I thought of was just living in reality, the virtue of living in reality. I mean, reality is, it's a broken world. It's a beautiful world. I'm a broken person. I'm a beautiful person. There are trade-offs in life. We can't hope for, we make choices as best we can, but there are consequences to choices. I don't determine reality. I have to live with the consequences. I have to try to use things the way they're meant to be used, or else things get broken, people get hurt. And those, there's a lot of trade-offs in reality, and there's a lot of things that cannot coexist. I don't know. So sorry, I'm really good at rambling, but those are the three things that came out for me for virtue. And it just takes this, again, wrestling. We have to constantly wrestle with the desire to make things easy instead of choosing the beautiful hards that are actually humanizing versus dehumanizing.
Mario, I'm sure you have further points to register here with us. And perhaps one of them is doing all that Valerie has said that we're called to do in a world in which there's great wealth and absolute poverty. And we Christians are called to a spiritual poverty. And Valerie's story, in a way, began at 17 when she first lived in a dwelling through which she could see the out of doors, even when she was indoors. I don't know if that's where you want to take us, but at some point we need to get there. And as always, I'm a broken record. Here we are, 8 minutes left.
Well, I think one of the intuition that Valerie shared with us, I think is, at least I find key, which is reality. A year ago, I went to Paraguay to visit, as I used to do before this pandemic, and I was interviewed by a good friend of mine at the TV station. And one lady, a journalist, a young mother, said, well, what are supposed to be telling my children today, because they just are very influenced by the media and so on? And I said, well, generally, I don't tell people anything. I'm just asking people to look at reality. And I do the likewise. Reality, I think, are the sign of Christ. And so going back to your reflection about wealth and poverty and everything, my attitude to that is just not start complaining too much about one way or another, rather than to do what is expected for me to do. And going back to what I said before, the movement and solidarity. There is a little book, not many people know, written in the 1980s by a priest who already passed away, Joseph Tischner, who was the chaplain of Solidarity Union in Poland. That little book was very read then, and Tischner was a very close friend of John Paul II. In that book, he said, well, what we need to do is, yes, solidarity, but solidarity is not just a principle. It's not an intellectual way of understanding reality. It's different. When you look at reality, you need to act according to what your reality is telling you in that particular moment. And you relate by not only your intellect, but your senses, your affection. So I think that is important. In other words, you cannot, and going back to my question, cancel anything from culture. You need to deal with that. And they deal with the bad stuff and the good stuff. Unless you want to build an utopian world, and then you make violence of that in that project. So having said that, it's a long reflection. What do you think, Valerie, about the what is lately very common, cancel culture. How do you understand that phenomenon under this light?
Yeah. I think it's a crisis of identity. I really think it's a crisis of identity. I mean, I can look back on my own journey. I mean, I'm a kind of a recovering perfectionist who's been really good at condemning myself. And one definition I read in a book recently of perfectionism is refusing to love yourself in a state of imperfection. And, you know, that's a huge wound. And I think the more I lived that lie, you know, that I wasn't lovable because I wasn't perfect, you know, in all the ways I felt like I needed to be perfect, the more I judged others harshly, the more I was tempted to, you know, the more I was canceling myself or not aware of my true identity, my true value, my true dignity as a child of God, as a beloved child of God, the more I was, again, looking for a sense of security and adequacy in things other than, you know, God. And I was more inclined to, again, not receive, like to hyper focus on deficiencies, you know. I don't know. I think we're not realistic as a culture. I think there's a real lack of hope and trust in humanity and a real, but also too high of an expectation of humanity to, again, to be what we're not. We're poor and we need God. There cannot be social justice without being people of relationship primarily with God, who is the origin, you know, the original and the ultimate lover of our soul, right? And so we're not going to look at others, people, culture, you know, cultural movements or anything like that with the right kind of vision if we aren't grounded in the right identity and anthropology, you know. So,
Christopher, last thoughts.
I don't know if I have many. What do you think the American Solidarity Party can do to show its commitment to families?
yeah, the
That's a big
American
question.
Solidarity Party. Yeah, thanks. It's a movement, right? So we are the people of the American Solidarity Party. Like, we are a movement of families, of people who are embedded in families. And so I think, first of all, we keep trying to be members of families, and both nuclear families and communities that are hope provoking, that we hold up, that we choose to wrestle and we choose to suffer the costs of love and of being what God has called us to be as family, so that the world can look up, can have more hope. So primarily, you know, again, tending to our primary vocations, which I have to say I struggle with. It's very much more satisfying some ways to sit here and talk with you gentlemen than it is to go up and clean up the kitchen right now. So we have to choose to keep redirecting our sight to the Lord and to our families and to our primary vocations, and choosing the hards that are beautiful, that produce beauty in our lives, in our hearts, in our souls, and in the world. And so, but for the party, you know, so again, the individual members of the party need to just to become saints, to be pursuing sanctity, which is just being truly true lovers, you know, but also continue to promote, well, the vision of the family as beautiful, and also as hard, that it takes heroic sacrifice to love, like the agape love, you know, to help people see what true love is. It has a cost, but it's a beautiful, hard, and it's worth pursuing. And then the pursuing, helping, you know, hold the light, shine the light on policy and practicalities, and that will help to tend that garden of our communities, of our nation full of communities and families. What policies are gonna help cultivate spaces in which people can thrive in families and communities.
I think it's time to end with the gospel for the day. And it's a sobering gospel. It has to do with families and the destruction of families and the need for prophecy and the cost of prophecy. This is from Mark. This is from Mark. And here it is. King Herod heard about Jesus, for his fame had become widespread, and people were saying, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That is why mighty powers are at work in him. Others were saying, he is Elijah. Still others, he is a prophet like any of the prophets. But when Herod learned of it, he said, it is John whom I have beheaded. He has been raised up. Herod was the one who had John arrested and bound in prison on account of Herodias, the wife of his brother Philip, whom he had married. John had said to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. Herodias harbored a grudge against him and wanted to kill him, but was unable to do so. Herod feared John, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man, and kept him in custody. When he heard him speak, he was very much perplexed, yet he liked to listen to him. Herodias had an opportunity one day when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers, his military officers, and the leading men of Galilee. His own daughter came in and performed a dance that delighted Herod and his guests. The king said to the girl, ask of me whatever you wish, and I will grant it to you. He even swore many things to her. I will grant you whatever you ask me, even to half of my kingdom. She went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask for? Her mother replied, the head of John the Baptist. The girl hurried back to the king's presence and made her request. I want you to give me at once on the platter the head of John the Baptist. The king was deeply distressed, but because of his oaths and the guests, he did not wish to break his word to her. So he promptly dispatched an executioner with orders to bring back his head. He went off and beheaded him in the prison. He brought in the head on a platter and gave it to the girl. The girl, in turn, gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. The gospel of the Lord. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Thank you so much, Valerie.
Thank you.
Thank you.